When detectives sat down with George Paul on May 8, 2026, they expected the broken confession of a man who'd just done something terrible. What they got was something else entirely. He told them he didn't kill his wife. He couldn't have. Because the woman he shot that afternoon, the woman who had shared his home, his bed, his life for 5.5 decades, wasn't his wife at all. She was a creature that had been impersonating Susan Paul for 55 years. And George Paul had just done what he believed was the only rational thing left to do. He wasn't sobbing. He wasn't in denial. He was calm, certain. He told investigators he believed such creatures were secretly taking over the world, and that he had found one, living in his house, pretending to be his wife. The woman he married in the early 1970s. The woman who grew old beside him in a quiet Wisconsin river town. Gone. Replaced. Not human. That was his truth. And it may be one of the most disturbing things I have ever had to say out loud. What happened on a peaceful nature trail in Wisconsin on a Thursday afternoon in May is not just a crime story. It is a collision between the worst of human tragedy and the most terrifying corner of neuroscience. Because here is what we know: George Paul's brain was broken. And in some deeply unsettling sense, his brain killed Susan Paul. The question that will haunt this case for years is whether that makes any difference at all. Pewett's Nest Nature Preserve sits about 50 miles northwest of Madison, Wisconsin. It is the kind of place people bring their children on Sunday afternoons. A scenic gorge carved from ancient sandstone, hiking trails threading through quiet forest, the kind of beauty that makes you forget anything dark exists in the world. On May 8, 2026, around 2 in the afternoon, George and Susan Paul pulled into the parking area in their gray Kia Carnival minivan. They were both 80 years old. Witnesses saw George Paul open the vehicle door and forcibly pull his wife from the van. And then he shot her, multiple times, at close range. Susan Paul died in that parking lot. George Paul got back behind the wheel and drove toward Baraboo. But he wasn't finished. About an hour later, at approximately 3:10 in the afternoon, that same gray minivan pulled into the lot of the Sauk Prairie Police Department. George Paul stepped out, walked to the building's entrance, and fired several shots directly into the front door and vestibule. 2 civilian staff members were inside. Somehow, mercifully, neither was killed. Police pulled him over shortly after. In the vehicle, they found a pistol, Susan Paul's purse, and blood. George Paul was taken into custody and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. His bond was set at $1 million cash. And when investigators asked him what happened, that is when the real story began. Before we go any further, I need you to hold someone in your mind for a moment. Her name was Susan Paul. She was 80 years old. She lived in Prairie du Sac, Wisconsin, a small river town on the Wisconsin River, the kind of place where families have lived for generations, where you know your neighbors, where ordinary life moves quietly. She had been married to George Paul for approximately 55 years. Think about that number. 55 years. Longer than most people watching this have been alive. A marriage that began in the early 1970s and stretched across every decade since. Through the seasons, through the years, through the slow accumulation of a shared life. We don't know a great deal about Susan Paul beyond these facts. She was, by all accounts, a private person in a small and quiet community. What we know is that she was someone's neighbor, someone's friend, someone's family. And she was, for 55 years, someone's wife. She went on what should have been an ordinary Thursday afternoon walk at a beloved nature preserve, and she never came home. According to the man who killed her, she had not been Susan at all. Not for a single day of those 55 years. She had simply kept showing up, kept being present, kept being the woman George Paul lived with. While, in the fractured landscape of his decaying mind, the real Susan had been gone since the beginning. That is a cruelty almost too vast to put into words. And it is one that Susan Paul could never have known was happening, In 1923, a French psychiatrist named Joseph Capgras published a paper about a patient he called Madame Macabre, a woman who had become utterly convinced that her husband had been replaced by an identical double. Not her real husband, an imposter, a copy. Capgras called it l'illusion dissociés, the illusion of doppelgangers. For decades, it was considered a psychiatric curiosity, a footnote in the literature. Then neuroscience caught up, and what it found was terrifying in its precision. Here is how the human brain recognizes the people it loves. There are two separate pathways running simultaneously. The first is the conscious recognition pathway, the part of your brain that looks at a face, processes the features, matches them to memory, and concludes, I know who that is. That's my wife. The second pathway is different. It runs through the amygdala, the brain's emotional core, and it generates something harder to describe. It's the warmth, the feeling of knowing, the sense that this is not just a face you recognize, but a person who belongs to you, who is yours, who is real. You don't just identify your wife. You feel that it's her. In Capgras syndrome, pathway 2 is severed, damaged, gone. The face is right. The feeling is absent. The brain, confronted with this impossible contradiction, does what brains always do when facts don't add up. It generates an explanation. It reasons, this can't be my wife. My wife would make me feel something. This person in front of me makes me feel nothing. Therefore, this must be an imposter. Neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran demonstrated this with devastating clarity. In his research with Capgras patients, he measured their autonomic nervous system responses, changes in heart rate, changes in galvanic skin response, when showing them photographs of their loved ones. The results were stark. Capgras patients showed no emotional activation at all. The people they loved registered in their bodies the same way strangers did. Flat. Nothing. The knowledge was intact. The feeling was gone. This is not a metaphor. This is not a psychological quirk or a loose way of describing grief. This is a specific, measurable, neurologically documented failure in the wiring of the human brain. You can see it on an MRI. You can measure it with electrodes. And it is most commonly caused by one thing: dementia. George Paul had documented dementia. Law enforcement knew it before May 8, 2026. He had previously called police and made threatening statements, behavioral signs of a mind in deterioration. At some point, we don't know exactly when, he looked at the woman who had shared his life for 55 years, and his brain simply stopped generating the feeling that she was Susan. His brain, lacking the emotional signal, built a story to explain the silence. Imposter, preacher, threat. George Paul now faces 5 criminal charges. At the top of the list, first-degree intentional homicide. But the court has already taken a significant and telling step. Before any trial can begin, forensic psychiatrists must determine whether George Paul is even competent to stand trial, whether he understands what he's accused of, whether he can assist in his own defense, whether he grasps the reality of the proceedings against him. Given documented dementia and the nature of his statements to investigators, this evaluation is going to be pivotal. And for a man of 80 with an advancing neurodegenerative disease, it may never produce a clear path to a conventional criminal trial. There are essentially 2 roads from here. If the evaluation finds him incompetent to stand trial, he will be committed to a psychiatric facility, almost certainly indefinitely. At his age, with his condition, the most likely outcome is a hospital ward, not a prison cell, for whatever time he has left. If, somehow, he is found competent, his defense would almost certainly pursue what Wisconsin law calls not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Wisconsin recognizes the full insanity defense if a defendant did not understand the nature of what they were doing or did not know it was wrong. Because of a documented mental disease, the law holds that they cannot be held criminally responsible in the standard sense. And consider what George Paul believed in that parking lot. He did not believe he was killing his wife. He believed he was destroying a creature, a non-human entity, that had infiltrated his life. In his mind, there may have been no crime at all. That is either the most compelling legal defense in this case, or it is the most devastating indictment of what dementia can do to a human being. Possibly it is both at once. The question forensic psychiatrists will have to answer is not whether Capgras delusion exists. It does. It is documented in peer-reviewed literature, confirmed through neuroimaging, and verified by objective neuropsychological testing across nearly a century of clinical observation. The question is whether George Paul's case is genuine, or whether a defense is being constructed around a diagnosis that happens to be convenient. And if we follow the evidence honestly, it points toward genuine. His dementia was documented before the killing. Law enforcement had records of his deteriorating behavior, prior threatening calls, prior contact. The foundation for a Capgras episode was already established on paper before Susan Paul died. His belief that she had been a creature spans 55 years in his telling. That temporal scope, a delusion stretching back to the very beginning of the marriage, is consistent with genuine pathological belief. Fabricators typically reach for narrow, recent justifications. They don't construct conspiracy frameworks that span decades. And crucially, there is no conventional motive, no affair, no financial benefit, no pattern of domestic violence in the record. Just an old man in a small Wisconsin town, a marriage of 55 years, and a brain that had been quietly dismantling itself for years. The prosecution will push back. They will point to the sequence of events, the deliberate pulling of Susan from the vehicle, the act of driving to a specific location, the targeted shooting at a specific building. These are organized, goal-directed actions. They suggest preserved executive function. They complicate any argument for a complete break from reality. And they're right to ask those questions. The law demands them. But here is the uncomfortable truth neither side can undo. Whatever George Paul believed in that parking lot, Susan Paul is dead. She did not get to have an opinion about what her husband's brain was doing to her. She did not get to say goodbye. She simply ceased to be. On a nature trail in Wisconsin, on an ordinary afternoon in May, because the man she had loved for 55 years stopped being able to feel that she was real. George and Susan Paul spent 55 years together. That is the kind of marriage most people spend their lives hoping for. A full lifetime built alongside one person, in a quiet town, through all the ordinary years that no one will ever write about. Dementia does not announce itself. It arrives slowly, in pieces, forgotten names, confused timelines, small moments of strangeness that the people who love you learn to explain away. And somewhere in that slow, invisible erosion, something in George Paul's brain stopped generating the signal that Susan was Susan. He stopped feeling her presence as something real. His brain, unable to accept that terrible absence, built a story in the void: imposter, creature, something to be feared and destroyed. The man who loved Susan Paul was, by that point, already gone, taken by the same disease that would ultimately take her. So here is the question I'll leave you with, because this case doesn't offer clean answers, and you deserve to sit with that. Is George Paul a murderer? He pulled the trigger. The law says there must be accountability for that. Susan Paul's life was taken, and that cannot be unmade. Or is he a victim, a man whose brain was hijacked so completely by a neurological disease that it turned the person he loved most in the world into something unrecognizable and terrifying? A man who, in some deep sense, had already lost his wife long before May 8th, just not in any way the world could see. The most unsettling thing about this case is not that it happened. It's that Capgras delusion is real, dementia is real, and the pathway that makes you feel the people you love are the people you love is just that. A pathway, a circuit, something that can be broken, in any brain, at any age. Leave your thoughts below. I want to know where you land.